over 130 residential schools operated in Canada. The first federal residential school began around 1883. The last closed in 1996. These schools, predominantly funded and operated by the Government of Canada and Roman Catholic, Anglican, Methodist, Presbyterian, and United Churches, were created to enforce the adoption of European traditions, languages, and lifestyles by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children. To better understand the history of these schools and what it meant to Indigenous communities, we invited residential school attendees and their families to share their stories and experiences. For some, these stories are a moment of healing. For others, a chance to talk about the history and the system. All are important to preserve for future generations. My name is Ryan Funk, and with my co-host Lisa Muswagon, we followed these stories for We Stand Together.
My name is Deborah Hayward. I'm from the Haisla Nation. It's known as Kitamaat Village, BC. I was sent to residential school for 2 years. I went to Port Alberni, and that was from 1969 to 1970. I was really confused. I just got home from school one day, and my mom had my bag packed on top of the stairway of our home. And I was really puzzled. I seen my mom standing there, and my uncle was standing by the car, and he's waiting. All my mom said was, "You have to go." And I just said, "Why, Mom? Where am I going?" And she said, "You're going to Port Alberni." And I just said, "Why? Why do I have to go?" And she said, "You just have to go." And she told me to pick up my suitcase, that my uncle would drive me to the bus in the next town, and I would leave from there. That was just how that happened. I was really shocked. I didn't know. I didn't have any idea that this was going to happen. I didn't even have a chance to go inside to say goodbye to my grandmother or anybody else. And my uncle just said, "Come on, let's go." I got my little suitcase, got into his car, and we went to the next town. And he just gave me a hug. And he just said, "Be a good girl. I love you." Told me I had to get on the bus. It was kind of like an orange bus. I got on the bus, and I noticed there were other teens. I was a teenager. I was 15. I looked around, and I just found a place and sat down, looked out the window. Bus driver took our names as we came in. When he started driving off, we kept on stopping at these little reserves, these little places, little towns, picking up other kids. Some were teens and some were like 4 years old. We were on a bus for 2 days. On the second day, we got to a ferry, and all the bus driver said to us was, "You have to be back at this bus by this time, and keep note of the time. You have to be here by that time." So we got off the bus, and I was relieved that my mom packed me some sandwiches, and we're on the ferry, and I kind of looked around and noticed the little children that were running around that were on the bus with us. They're kind of going crazy, going wild. I was talking to some of the other teenagers, and I said we should round up the kids so that nobody gets hurt or anything. And we rounded them up, and we shared our lunches with them, just kept an eye on them till we were called back to go on the bus. We got on the bus, and we got to the residential school, and the supervisor came on the bus, and she had a clipboard with her, and she was going through our names. She said, "You'll go by this number you'll put on your clothes that we give you. We're going to be taking the clothes you have with you, and we're going to be giving you new clothes tomorrow." And she had us line up, and we got out of the bus and went into the building, and it looked kind of foreign to me. It was a big brick building, a few stories high. We went inside, and she took us up to the dorm, and she said, "You have to get undressed, just to your underwear, and follow me. We're going to go down to the basement. There's a nurse waiting down there." And she took our clothes from us, gave us a towel to wrap around our shoulders, We went down the basement and there was a nurse waiting, and she's putting white powder on everyone's hair. Oh, I forgot to say, this was a girls' building, all girls. It got to be my turn, and I sat down in the chair, and I asked the nurse, why are you putting that white powder on me? And she says, in case you have bugs. I said, I don't have any bugs. And she just kind of shrugged her shoulders. And when she was done, she just said, you can go line up, you can go back upstairs. Went upstairs, and the supervisor gave us all nightgowns and told us to put the towel on our beds, and we'll get new clothes in the morning, and don't forget to put your number on it. And in the morning, you will line up for breakfast. When she went back down the hallway, I remember hearing her keys making loud noise. She had a lot of keys. And I just went and I stood by the window because I was wondering where I was and how far I was from home. I was looking out the window, thinking about my family, and I could hear some other girls crying in the background. I just looked out and I looked up the top of the window. It had kind of like fence-like material, kind of plastic, how the plastic fence looks. It was at the top of the window, and we're on the second floor. And I was thinking, do they really think we'll try and escape out of the second floor? It's so high. I just looked out. The window's open a little bit, so I just looked out, and it was raining. I was thinking about my grandmother, hoping that she was okay, and my family. My brother was there. I'm not sure how long he was there before I got there. He told me a month. We lined up the next morning, went for breakfast, and we weren't allowed to have conversations with males. We had to be a lineup of all females, and the males were behind us. They had to come and have lunch with us because it was like a shared lunchroom. But we sat on one side, the boys sat on the other side, and had to wait till after breakfast and talk to my brother. He told me that he was going to be leaving. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, we're running away. I said, who? He said, me, Ron, and this other guy. I can't remember who the other person was. And I said, when? He said, probably not too long. So I kept on. I was trying to talk to him, but we're told to step apart. We weren't allowed to stand next to each other, even if we're family. Had to stand apart. And I just kind of kept my eye on my brother from then on. And the meals were very small. I remember trying to have cereal and milk, but the milk really upset my tummy. We just had small servings. I couldn't have any milk. So from then on, I just had toast and porridge, but with no milk, and maybe a fruit of some sort, or toast, one toast, I think. People that worked in the kitchen would pack us a lunch for school every day, just a sandwich and a fruit, or else a sandwich and an apple or orange or something. I remember getting to the high school, just thinking, another place where I got to try fit in. But I was really into sports. I played a lot of basketball, and I liked playing softball. So that's how we got to know kids from other places, like a house at Tofino, outlying places outside Port Alberni. Sometimes we'd share our lunches, or sometimes I'd just give my lunch away because most times I didn't like it. And we'd throw a softball back and forth to the kids from the other reserves, and that's how we got to know each other. Favorite class was home ec, cooking. Being in there one day, and the teacher was making fried bread, and she looked at me and she said, Deborah, do you know how to make fried bread? And I said, I remember making it probably one time. I don't know if I remember the right way. So I ended up, and I was trying to sew her, and then it turned out perfect. After that, whenever she would have classes where she's trying to include fried bread into it, she'd come to whichever class I was in and knock on the door and say, can Deborah come help me with my class? So I'd go and help the class in making fried bread. One of my favorite memories was in home ec, they said, pick a country. And we looked through the atlas. I chose Spain. The home ec teacher would say, now look for a dish you'd like to try. I was looking through the recipes, and I found some sort of rice with tomatoes. That's the one I chose. She would say, here's your money. I'm going to take you shopping. You get the ingredients only for your recipe, and we'll come back to the school. So we got our ingredients, went to the store and paid for it. If there was any change, we gave it to her. I think mine was Spanish rice. The following day we had hummus, and that's what I made. I remember being a little bit nervous, but not too nervous because I believe I started cooking, baking when I was 10. I had a little bit of idea how to cook rice, and she was there to help us if we had any problems. And it turned out really good. One thing I liked about that class was if there's any leftovers, you're allowed to take it. One day we made fudge, so our class was a hit because kids were lining up outside the windows for fudge, and we're able to share with everybody. I have good memories about that school. I was kind of like a tomboy. I remember wrestling with some of the other boys from my residential school and just sitting together, sometimes having lunch. I just tried really hard in school because I thought I was sent away because I failed a grade. I failed grade 8. In my mind, I was thinking, I'm going to try harder. Maybe they'll let me go home. So I really put myself into my schoolwork and did my best. I really liked that school. One thing I remember about residential school was when we wrote letters home. Sometimes we didn't get letters back from our family. I remember coming home the first year and trying to run up the stairs to see my little gran. Her room was all empty. I went back downstairs and I said, "Where's Gran?" And Mom said, "Didn't you get our letter? We let you know that she passed away." I just started crying. I said, "No, I didn't get the letter. I didn't know that she had passed on." So I went and spent time in her room and just looked out the window, wishing that I would have known. It was kind of hard for me trying to get used to structure and lineups because my childhood had been like freedom. I had a lot of freedom. And I was the oldest of the girls. I had a lot of responsibility for my younger siblings. We spent a lot of time outside playing. And I remember the first year that I was sent away, I think it was maybe a year or two before that, I remember my parents were starting to get into alcohol. And sometimes we were sent to different homes to go invite people to come to my mom and dad's party. And I remember telling Mom and Dad, don't send us to this certain home, because when we tried to go to that home, this man tried to chase us, myself and my sister. And I said, it's not safe. That's when I witnessed what alcohol did to my family. There's a lot of fighting. Well, at the beginning, it was good because people would be playing guitars and they'd be talking, laughing, but then later on, there'd be fighting and there would be blood. And that's when I realized I have to keep the girls safe because of the attitude of some of the men. So I'd spend time kind of locking ourselves in a room, and I'd take care of my sisters and the little boys. I remember sometimes when Mom and Dad would fight, I would just grab the young ones and we'd run up the hill to where my uncle and aunt lived. I'd be carrying them and we'd carry my brothers and sisters and we'd stay there overnight and go back home the next morning. I just realized watching them with alcohol, and I asked my dad one time, when did you start drinking? He just looked at me and he said, I remember when the steamboats first came into our village. I went down to the dock to go see the steamboats like everybody was. And he said the first thing the non-native person handed me was a bottle, told me to take a drink. He said, you'll like it. And he took a drink and he said it was alcohol. And he said since then is when he started drinking. Every year we'd come home from residential school in the seasons, like wintertime, summertime. Every time I'd come home, I'd be thinking, maybe I'll be able to stay home this time. Then the family dynamic started changing with the alcohol, where my parents actually separated. And that added more confusion because then I didn't really know where I belonged. I remember writing a lot of poetry when I was a teen. And one of them I talked about not knowing which world I belonged in, because there were so many different changes, being on the outside looking in. And I'd come home the summertime or wintertime. And some of the girls would say, "Oh, when are you going back?" And I'd say, "Oh, I just got here." I just wrote that down to jealousy, and I just carried on with my visit with my family and just ignored people that were saying things like that. My mom was from a different village. She had arranged marriage with my dad. She said she was 16 when they got married, and he was 21. My dad came from a chief's family, and my mom came from this little village called Kingham Inlet. I remember coming home in the summertime, walking through the village with my sister, and one of the ladies was standing by her door, and she'd say, "Go back where you came from, you alert bay." I'm not going to swear. That's what they would say to us, and I would just look up there, and I would say, "Go back to where you came from," because I knew our people were from different places in our village. So we had to put up with things like that. My first year was kind of hard and not really knowing if I was going to be allowed to stay home or not. The second year, I kind of just gave up wanting to be home because there was just too many changes at home with the family, with my parents separating, and it was just too difficult. So I just put myself into sports and put myself into my school, just did my very best. Oh no, I'm going too far ahead. I want to talk about when we did get clothes, all our clothes were identical. Like for myself as a 15-year-old, my clothes were identical down to someone that was maybe 10. They get all the same kind of clothes. So we'd have all the same clothes. So we try to find ways to make them stand out or adapt to ourselves. I remember running into racism in the first high school I was sent to with the girls. I remember my uncle telling me to turn the other cheek. When it got too hard, I realized when we're playing grass hockey, this is one way we can get back to those girls, because in grass hockey, you're able to use whatever maneuver. We're able to get back at the girls by using our hockey sticks and not get into trouble. So that was one way. And there's one time, it was lunchtime, went to the area where we threw our softball around, and I seen this boy pushing another teen from my residential school around, and I just went up and told him to leave him alone. He said, "Make me." I said, "Well, tomorrow. You can wait till tomorrow." But I got the young man away, and I contacted some of my friends from the other school, and they were from other villages. And one of them drove a car, and I said, "Can you come to my school tomorrow?" I said, "There's somebody that wants to see you guys." So they came and they got out of the car, and one of the guys that I found looked like a football player. No, my second year, I don't call it residential school. I call it genocidal prison, because that's what I felt it was, because we're locked in every night. I remember falling into the routine and just really not wanting to come home to visit much anymore. And the second year is when my oldest brother, we got news that he was in a boating accident, and we had to come home because they were searching for his body. And we got home on the seaplane. I remember going down to the wharf when one of the boats was coming in, and they had something under a tarp. I remember somebody lifted it up, and I seen my brother lying there, and I just kind of fell to my knees, and that was so heartbreaking. He just graduated from high school. I seen him as our protector. He was always there for us. He'd be the one that would take the girls aside and my family, and he would say, "I'm going to teach you how to fight." So he taught us how to do different exercises and using his weights and things like that. I think he watched Bruce Lee because he's teaching us about kicking too, kicking in the air. He teaches punching, and I remember getting into a fight in school, and I could hear him in the background, and he would say, "Deb, don't fight like a girl." I'd start throwing punches. So my brother did teach us how to defend ourselves. It was shortly after that where I found out that we're going to be able to leave the residential school. And we had just what we're wearing is what we went home with when we got here to my home village. And I was talking to my mom and I said, what about the things we left behind? I know I had photos and letters and some other clothes. And she said, maybe write and ask. So I wrote and asked, and I never did get an answer. And I never did get my belongings back. That was kind of confusing to me. After I finished residential school, I thought I was going to be able to stay with my mom, but she said, oh, social workers were telling me that you're going to have to go into foster homes to finish off your school year. So that's what happened to me for the next 2 years as I was in foster homes until I graduated. So that's my story.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us, Deborah. As you're telling it, I'm glad to hear that your sense of humor has remained intact despite the struggles that you went through.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. It was very powerful, and all the experiences that you've been through. I'm pretty sure it's been quite the healing journey for you.
I was able to go through a couple of years of trauma healing. I went to a treatment center that had different cycles, and one of them was residential school. So I went to that one, and that's when I learned about cold water cleanses. And that's where I learned about meditation, things like that. So I was able to start there. And then after that, I would see a different therapist over the years to help me. Whenever there's healing, anything to do with healing in my community, I always try to go. That helps me quite a bit. And plus my family.
We hear the words reconciliation thrown out a lot. What should the steps be moving forward for non-Indigenous folks and our governments to work through reconciliation with Indigenous communities?
I believe that to learn as much as you can about our people and to learn as much as you can about the history of residential school and how it affected our families and how it affected a person. And kind of look at the history of that. I believe that's very important start.
In all the works of that are whatever is going on out there that people are doing to take these steps of reconciliation. Maybe you want to share what you've done for your community to kind of inspire that, to spark that healing journey. Maybe you've been a role model to your family or your community members or your nation. Maybe you want to share a little bit about that in terms of like rising in your healing.
I have been a role model for my community for a few years in a row. I used to be a preschool teacher. I was taught about medicine when I first moved home many years ago. And that's one thing that I do teach is for our people about harvesting, preserving our medicine and using it in times of sickness instead of the over-the-counter medicines. I don't really see myself as a role model. I just believe in living a healthy life and knowing that age is no limit and you can follow your dreams. It doesn't matter what your dreams are. There may be obstacles in your way, but there are ways of getting over obstacles. You're never too old to learn.
I love how you took the teaching, what you learned from the medicines, and you took it right to the young people. That's such an amazing bridge that you can do in this time. And again, we're so grateful to have you. And
these stories help give perspective on the history of what Indigenous folks had gone through, and it can allow for younger individuals like myself and Lisa to learn from them so that horrible experiences of families being torn apart don't happen.
Yeah, it was the residential school that took a lot of the family bondings.
Yep, and a lot of lost history.
I wanted to say that everything that was taken from me since residential school, genocidal prison, and foster homes, that I did get it back. I did get back my language and my culture. I teach my language to my grandbabies. I believe I'm still learning. So what I'm learning, I teach to my grandbabies, and since they were babies, I've taught them sign language, and so they can do both and speak English. So they're able to let us know what they want. Two of the youngest grandbabies were really not very verbal, so the sign language helped. And then if I'd look out the window, I would teach them how to say bird and just little things like that.
Multicultural is located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis.